Good morning. This is Travis Mark and America Francis. We're with Steward Growth, and today we're going to be talking about conflict coaching. Uh, and what this session is it's um, ideas and thoughts around how people resolve conflict or ways people can resolve conflict more effectively or efficiently, or the effects of conflict on us individually or personally, or on societies or groups. Um, for today, what we want to explore is we're going to talk about people who we found individually like to be interesting or effective dispute resolution personalities or people, like maybe the role they played that was positive or negative, or things that worked, or so it's a little bit different because we're not necessarily talking specifically about a theme today or a topic today. It's more maybe things that we see in society that have an impact that we're like, oh, that's interesting. Maybe that was effective, maybe that wasn't effective.
Sounds like a topic.
Sounds like a topic. Do you have any opening people, America, that you're like, I love this person who's as a conflict resolution practitioner?
Well, I've been focusing a lot on detachment recently, and I found it very effective. And I learned some really good detachment principles from you. But the person I've been thinking about that, honestly, I don't know a whole lot about Nelson Mandela, but I've been thinking a lot about the role of our thinking, because he accomplished a lot while he was in prison. Like all of this mental work and all of this vision board stuff and your desires and your planning and whatever. Like, I think we focus a lot on action, and sometimes the best conflict resolution path for peace is to be silent. Also Gandhi, right? Like, people can resist in kind of non-traditional ways that are very powerful. It doesn't have to be an aggressive way. It doesn't have to be an angry way, but people can make a big difference in peace by being still and being who they are.
Yeah, well, and also if we look at Nelson Mandela and Martin Luther King and Gandhi, a lot of times they use their stillness or the detached action to make another place or person act. So, like when Martin Luther King went into the Birmingham, he knew he would get arrested, and he wanted to get arrested right before primetime television news channels ran the evening news. So he knew that the personality of that sheriff in Birmingham would arrest him, and he would be seen being arrested. But he just needed to, like, he didn't extravagantly do something. He just was where he was not supposed to be according to the sheriff, and he got arrested so that he could be visible on a camera, and then that would have this impact on America on the evening news. And Gandhi would do similar things where he would just be present in a way that people had to say, how am I going to react to what's happening? Like, if Gandhi's not going to eat for 40 days and people actually care about him and love him, like, what is going to happen next? Or, there's a variety of different things that happen with Gandhi that relate to, like you're identifying, that just that he kept being present and in the way. And so that people had to figure out, like, what's going to happen.
You
And
don't have to be confrontational. You don't even have to tell people what to do, right?
yeah, like,
You can make invitations by your being there and acting in conformance with your values and what you think is the right thing to do.
yeah, absolutely. Because sometimes just acting in a way that is inconsistent with the expectations of the person or the people involved, it makes people go, wow, we have to actually comply. We have to conform. Like, we have to go through with our threat. We have to, like, well, how important was our threat? Like what do we do in order to address this situation, because this person is acting inconsistent with whatever, right?
I mean, we could even talk about the person in Tiananmen Square in front of the tank, right?
Exactly. Yeah, just
Walked up, stood there, wasn't going to move, didn't have a weapon, And I just read a really good book on this, actually. Shoot, what's it called? We become what we normalize, or something like that.
Huh.
Like, it was talking about how our culture is based on the things that people accept and don't accept. And I'm going to walk back that endorsement a little bit. Like, I like the first part of the book better, but it's really important to think about what things we feel uncomfortable about, and still we don't speak up, or we don't take some kind of action, and we have these slippery slopes where if you don't say anything for long enough, then there's Nazi Germany. Like, you've got to pick your lines in the sand, and you've got to just look at what behavior will you tolerate, what will you not tolerate, how will you make your influence felt in the most important ways. And sometimes the consequences are very unpleasant, but I mean, but if you don't do anything, sometimes you can find yourself in a really bad spot because nobody did anything.
Yeah. Well, and even if, if we come into like couple relationships or business relationships in which one person has power, another person doesn't have power, whether that power is in
Or you
fact
both have
power,
power and give it up, right?
yeah, or there's leveraged positions that, whatever, and a person acts and basically is identified, I'm no longer compliant. Like I appreciate that this is important to you. It's just not important to me. Sometimes even in that this can be kind of like a low level thing or a tremendously high level thing. But the fact that that is communicated as in I'm still going to act in a way that's defiant to you. If you, like you're saying, if you don't act, you've just allowed this thing to happen.
You're putting yourself in your own prison. Like, sometimes it's little things, little things, little things, and then it gets to a point where only big decisions are that are uncomfortable are left to you because of your previous decisions.
Yeah, and they become more and more uncomfortable because you know that at some point, in order to reestablish your own identity with yourself, even something has to happen because
Well,
you know
and
that.
sometimes you try lots of things and you eliminate like, this doesn't work and this doesn't work and this doesn't work and this is, and then you're like, oh no, the easy stuff doesn't work. So then we have the hard options.
Yeah, but I think the idea is like you've alluded to, is that we know when we've been trespassed against, and immediately that creates a prison for us. Like it could be a large prison, or it could be a shallow prison, or it could be like a, but just the fact that we know we've been trespassed against and we're not acting to protect our boundaries.
Well, it's resentment, right?
Yeah,
And
well,
then you
definitely
have this
resentment, anger,
long list
betrayal.
of things like, I let this go, and that's bringing up our favorite book, right? Like, Loving What Is says you can't just blame the person for all the trespasses, right? You have to look at your own piece, which is, I allowed it that time, and I allowed it that time, and I allowed it that time. And once you can center on that power, then you're like, oh, I don't have to allow it this time. And I can speak up about what happened all those times, and I can help other people avoid. I mean, not that we need to rescue. This detachment book is so good because it keeps reorienting you to, it's my business or it's none of my business. Like, everybody else's stuff is their own journey and their own path, and you got to stick with yours because it's easy to get distracted.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, particularly because I think if you're distracted by the other people's processes, then you're losing the intuitive awareness of your own process and where you should be at or what you should be experiencing. And so losing your identity in the conflict or in what is in your best interest definitely is like not going to help you come up with the outcome that it will be good.
And I think the culture sometimes steers us in that direction, especially for women. You get all this messaging about you both take care of each other. But if you just take care of the other person, they don't take care of, like, you have to stay oriented to you also, even if you're in some type of caretaking role that is appropriate and you accept.
Yeah, exactly. I like that. So, one person who I think like identifies with this theme really well is Brene Brown,
Mm-hmm.
because one of the reasons we do or do not engage in our boundaries or in our our resentments or our trespasses or our betrayals often relates to shame and vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
And when we start to consciously give up our ground, it often relates to our own vision of ourselves, because we might then say, well, this, peace is more important than my identity, peace is more important than my safety, children
Because
are
my
more,
needs and wants don't matter.
because my needs and wants don't matter. I am in a shame state because I am unworthy or I am whatever. Therefore, I don't need to have a forthright position that says I'm of value.
Right. I shouldn't assert.
Right. So I think I really like Brene Brown because she'll, standing strong, and, a lot of those books relates to loving what is concept of like embracing yourself where you're at and starting maybe with small battles and victories and small steps where you say, I'm just not going to move on this, you know?
Well, and you can, even before you're pushing back like that, you can say, I'm going to take care of myself today. And this is the way I'm going to eat. I'm going to sleep. I'm going to exercise. I'm going to get medical care, whatever. Like, if you can see yourself as worthy of care and act in a way that's consistent with that, it can help.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Self-care is one of the very first ways that you're at least ending conflict with yourself. So you can say like, here, this is what's happening.
Yeah, it is very clarifying when you're in a relationship and you say to yourself, this doesn't work for me and I'm going to do something about it.
Yeah, well, I think ultimately, if we look at loving, what is Katie Bronte or Bronte Katie, I, it's kind of confusing because I think her last name sounds like a first name.
Yeah, I don't
Byron
think
Katie, yeah,
it's
Byron Katie.
Byron. Yeah, yeah.
Um, Ultimately, she comes up with her theory of loving what is in the basement of her soul, right? Right. She's at a rehab place on the ground, totally dysfunctional, totally out of whack, totally gone, and she kind of just has an epiphany that she keeps fighting reality, and she needs to embrace that. Like she needs to just embrace, why am I doing this?
I think it's a lot like DBT, also dialectical behavior therapy, which is really good in the mediation situation, because when you get two different people that have really opposing perspectives, you have to accept both of them as having some element of truth, and they can both exist at the same time and be true. So
Yeah,
it helps you to be able to integrate differences, even in yourself, to see I can be happy and sad at the same time. I don't know, like this person brings good and bad into my life, and I'm a person that has good and bad behavior and characteristics, whatever. I'm still okay. But some people just look at their good things and try to hide all the other things, and looking at your whole self is really useful.
yeah, I agree. I am reminded though, I act as a pro tem judge in small claims cases also, and like a couple weeks ago I was in court with a guy who I think was a actual perpetual liar, and he's presenting his reality to the court as true in
Uh-huh.
order to get out of paying and being accountable to his client.
Yeah.
And so I recognized that I had to step away from the fact that everything he said was not true and actually go through it procedurally, because as a neutral between the parties, even though I was going to have to make an ultimate decision, I still needed to help that party feel like I understood their evidence. Like coming back to what you're saying is that even though he's saying it's true and I don't think it's true, I'd still spent at least 40 minutes saying, this is what this text appears to indicate to me.
Yeah.
Can you help me understand, or do you have any corresponding evidence that would help me understand how it is meaning what you're saying? Because what you're saying does not appear to be accurate based upon this text.
And that's an interesting thing when you're looking at the justice part of it. Like, in order to like that whole process is to make it just, and you're putting against those criteria of justice, and that can be complicated for people who have their own ideas about justice and
Yeah, because
and
I
fairness.
ultimately,
And
yeah, I ultimately ruled against the guy after I took a long time to help him feel like he was understood, and he was still very unhappy about the outcome. But I said, but this is the basis for why I'm doing this, is that this individual has the following information that appears to be valid. You do not have supporting information that would help me understand your side of the case. I mean, and that's a little bit different than like a personal relationship, because a personal relationship may have ongoing natures that need to be salvaged or fixed or preserved. And I'm basically there as a one-off, like, they're not going to appear before me again. I'm just being asked to make a decision after knowing them for an hour, right?
but very few people probably have experience and have an accurate concept of what the judge can give them, because a lot of people just go to court to get someone else to say that they're right.
Yeah. Well, and what you just said is so true, because on that day, I had 3 cases, and 2 out of the 3, the people who lost were very mad at me, because they were really just looking for confirmation bias. Like, they just want to be told that they were right. And I said, and one guy even said, like, you're just siding on her side. And I said, this has nothing to do. I said, I am siding on her side. Like, I'm making a decision based upon the facts, but I have no relationship with this other person. Your facts are just not true.
Well, the
And
other thing that's hard is you expect that the court will care about lots of information, and they really don't have the time to get all the context that you think is relevant.
right.
So it's such a tiny, you're like, wait, you're deciding on this, and this, and there's all this other stuff that you have and the judges know they don't know all the stuff.
Yeah,
But
well, and one of the issues for the first case where I decided, which was different than the liar case, was that the contract said within 10 days of the event, all monies are due,
Mhm.
which I interpreted as, this means the money is now not discretionary, like it is now due, right? And I
Right.
began to share with them. I said, look, this is an industry standard. Like, I said, I've even done events across the country in which this clause was used against me when I did not have the event, because it says the money was due. Like, it doesn't say I have to actually have the event. It says that they are losing time and space and all these things. And the guy says, well, it wasn't my fault that the event was canceled. I said, that's not in your contract either.
That's why you have a contract.
Yeah, I said, the contract says it's due. He says, yeah, but I'm here in good faith because I didn't have any control over whether the thing was canceled. I said,
If you were on the other side of it, you would want your money.
yeah. And he just was so upset that I wouldn't understand the contract. And I said, but he didn't cancel 10 days. He canceled the weekend of, like there was like 3.5, 4 days until the event.
Well,
And
the
he was
other thing
still
is
mad.
people are so morally relativistic right now. They're like, because it's my circumstance, it should go my way, and not
Yeah.
look at any of the other people's scenario. It's just like, I should win because everybody gets a trophy, right?
Yeah.
Like, I
Well,
can't lose. It's
and
important to me.
well, and another part for this guy, he was the father, and it related to a religious reason. And so then also there was like a righteousness element to it, that the court was supposed to side with this righteousness part of it. And I thought, man, so you're being self-righteous about the reason you breached the contract, and that's why people are supposed to deviate. And
Mhm.
I,
It
I
didn't
mean,
have that clause in there. There was no addendum that said religious reasons don't work.
I know, but I think that it's difficult when people of faith and their in their rightness believe their rightness and their faith should prevail when like that has nothing to do with at all with the contract.
Right.
But sometimes because in essence they feel like they're that prodigal son, the prodigal son who was the good guy. Like I've been the good guy, like this should work out to my favor. And you're like, unfortunately, even good guys still suffer the consequence of the contract.
Your blessings are in heaven.
Yeah. So it was interesting because I think one of the elements of doing for me the right thing is also being having to adapt to the fact that people will be uncomfortable. Like people will not like you. They will lose. They will have to adjust to the fact that they are losing, or the conflict is not resolvable in a certain situation or a certain context. And so if you have to decide that, like if you're being paid to be the decision maker, you have to decide that.
Well, and if you look at that whole uncomfortable thing, if people are too comfortable around you and they're all doing the wrong thing, what does that say about you? Like,
All right.
I was reading the other day and Jesus was like, everybody rejected me. Like, I'm the best there is and I got rejected. So don't be surprised when other people are rejecting you. And if you're doing the right thing, you're going to get rejected hard. And that's good.
Yeah. No, yeah, I think that was a very interesting and very um, deep line from Christ. He's like, they rejected me first.
Yeah. What do you expect?
Yeah, like where do you think this is going to go? Because they rejected me first.
But at the same time, it's also like a bar. Like if you're not just getting rejected, are you too lukewarm for this job? If you're not giving the message that cuts like a two-edged sword, you need to maybe step it up and deliver the real message that doesn't always feel comfortable.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting thing about the message that's not comfortable is if you look at Supreme Court cases, oftentimes they have a strategic dissent.
Hmm.
So the dissent person already knows they're losing.
Yeah.
And so they have nothing to lose in expressing themselves completely and fully and even sarcastically and contemptuously, because oftentimes I don't think that, like, they could be friends. Like, for example, Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Anthony Scalia were friends, like
Mm.
really good friends, and they were absolutely polar opposites in their decisions oftentimes.
Mm-hmm.
And so the fact that Scalia could, in his dissent, be just unabashedly, um, you know,
Authentic, right? You're always
maybe,
saying you should be able to. Well, I mean, sometimes we don't express how we feel because we're worried or think what we think because we're worried about the reactions of other people. If
yeah,
you can be fully authentic and put all of your out there thinking and someone can accept you and value you, that's huge.
yeah, and I think what you're saying is very important to Scalia and Ginsburg. In purpose of the dissent, he didn't care if anybody accepted the dissent, right? Because the point was to show that the decision wasn't complete. Like the decision didn't provide a complete resolution because of shortcuts that were taken, because of the different interpretations of the law, because
And
of
it's
different.
valuable to have the dissent.
I
It's
agree.
valuable to have all of that to look at.
Yeah, and I think being able to realize that if you have nothing to lose by saying the truth, then say the truth, you know?
But if you have something to lose by saying the truth, still say the truth.
Well, I think the question when you have something to lose and you're saying the truth is sometimes there's an element of discretion because diplomacy, I'm not saying you should repress yourself.
You're not saying to lie.
Yeah, well, I'm not saying to lie or lie to yourself or to But sometimes if all you're left with is burning the village down, like you burn the village down. But if the point is there could still be some reasonable ground for resolution if you didn't fully express everything that you wanted to say in your soul.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. I'm not saying you should kitchen sink all of it.
Yeah, well, because some people are like, I just need you to know that you're blah, 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 right? And the point is like, so I needed to know that you knew that, or
I mean, I don't think someone else is responsible to necessarily sit there and be a captive audience to our venting.
absolutely. And that's the point. And if you have a relationship that may be of some value, venting isn't helpful. But if there's some element of like, I've been betrayed for a long time and I've just been keeping that to myself, I need to let you know, like that is relevant because
well, you have to find a way to communicate whatever's going on. You have to find a way. If they don't care what's going on, that's an issue.
yeah. So let's talk about some of these other people who are like at the like, we have nothing to lose, so let's do this. The one that's coming to my mind right now is Abraham Lincoln with the Emancipation Proclamation, because it was such a strategic document that he knew it was like a sacred thing to the South to not lose their slaves. He knew it was a sacred thing to the North that it needed to stop. So, in order to kind of create a boundary of looking like you're doing something, he frees all the slaves in the states that are in rebellion. He didn't free all slaves, only the states in rebellion. So it appears that he's made this proclamation in which he is freeing people that he had authority to free, but the states are actually in rebellion, right? And so he's giving two warring parties that are on the verge of destroying the complete union, something that will help appease. But even to the slaves themselves, right? Like there's now freemen around the United States. Like he said the thing that is not being said. He said, I am freeing slaves, which in and of itself, like nobody is saying that, right? Like nobody has said, because everybody has been so politically correct. Like, well, we're going to try to preserve the Union and slavery. We're going to preserve the Union and have the Missouri Compromise. We're going to try to preserve the Union and have the Mason-Dixon line. But ultimately to say we have to draw the line, even if it's a little bit of a facade, it was still said. And I think sometimes that's really important is because that is still movement, right? Like you're still moving.
Oh,
If
and that
you,
happens a lot in mediation because you have to get to the place where you can go, and it may not be the place the other party wants to go, but if it's impossible to get there, the movement is helpful.
and you have to say it. And it's amazing how if you don't say it, it isn't said. Like it seems like a really semantic type thing, but sometimes eventually saying the thing in sincerity, the thing that everybody knows should be said, or is
But the other person can't say it, so you have to say it.
well, somebody has to say it, right? I mean, it has to eventually be identified.
But they can't accept it from the other person because that
Correct.
person is so wrong. But if
Right.
you bring it up,
Right. So even like you and I had a mediation a little bit ago in which we knew it was going to come down to money. And we knew that both sides were telling us what they wanted us to hear. But it was going to come down to money, right?
and not a whole big difference of it.
All right. So I told the guy everything he was winning. And I said, and it costs you this much money. And he's like, no way. And so then we could say, so I appreciate that much money is more important than being divorced. And he's like, I don't like you saying it that way. But the point was, we said it, right?
Yeah.
We had to show him everything he was gaining.
If you pay this money, you'll get divorced. That's
Right.
all.
Right. But he had to, it had to be packaged in such a way that it said, and he's like, oh, like this is now no longer an act of defiance just because it's an act of defiance that's like limiting my freedom, that's limiting my ability to move on, that's limiting. And sometimes, like in deals, like even though it stinks and like horrible and whatever, it costs something to move on.
Well, that's a frequent topic when they're training mediators. They're like, you can tell that it's been a good outcome when everybody's mad. Like everybody feels like they got ripped off. It's not like there's a real winner or both winners. Sometimes it just is what it is.
Right. Well, and even if we come back to Gandhi, right? Like if we lose Gandhi, that's going to be worse than if we do something to make things better for these different religious populations, right? Or with Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, they had to extend the option to vote, which meant there's going to be a black president, right? Because there's more black people than there are white.
Mm.
So, but was that was more important than not extending that option, that ultimate right to vote, right? And Nelson Mandela being released from prison, and so like there's often going to be that really uncomfortable, hard trade and conflict. But sometimes the result, like if you don't do this thing, it will be worse.
And we don't necessarily give credit to whoever the opposition people were that allowed it to happen, right? We value Nelson Mandela, but we don't say what kind of courage did it take for whoever was opposing him to relent in some way that made it possible.
Yeah, like to eventually go backwards. It's a gigantic thing to actually retreat a little bit, or to be able to say, I'm going to retreat, I'm going to step backwards, I'm going to concede this point. Yeah, that's definitely huge.
Especially when they're in a situation where it's sometimes people just feel like it's existential, right? Like I can't live in a world where whatever. And they just get super stuck.
Yeah. Well, and I think that um do you know Bill Maher? He's
No.
he's a political commentary comedian, satirist. He has his different shows. They're often very irreverent and and irascible, etc. But he made a comment on the Israeli Palestinian conflict that was really interesting because he goes through the historical relationship in the conflict, and ultimately he says the biggest problem is that um, the Palestinians want 100%, and if they're not getting 100%, then they don't settle. Like, and he didn't argue. He wasn't arguing the politics, right? He wasn't saying whether they're right or whether they're wrong or whether the Jews are right or Israel's wrong. Specifically, he was just saying as a strategy, if 100% is the only option, you can't wonder why you're in conflict.
I know something about that.
Right. And I think that like when we talk again about loving what is, like if we can at some point say my expectations are perpetuating this thing, that's a problem, right? That will be a perpetual issue.
Well, and
with
if you're looking at the whole eye for an eye, then everyone's blind. And then you look at Jesus as a symbol of peace, right? Prince of Peace, because somehow he can help solve those worst problems. The Israeli and Palestinian conflict is an example of something that most people find very, very difficult to fix, but there's some way to resolve that. And we can have faith that even the most difficult problems can find a peaceful resolution.
Yeah, and oftentimes, like for example, when the Palestinian state was created, the UN said it was fine to create it. The United Nations.
I mean, define the Palestinian state.
So when they created the state of Israel, they created an area that was Israel, and they kind of like isolated. They didn't necessarily solve. They didn't solve this area. They gave the Israelis the state, right? This Israel state.
Okay.
It was done by a vote of the
But
international community.
you're saying the political boundaries of the state of Israel. And when you call it a Palestinian state, that's a little confusing.
Yeah, I agree. So
Okay.
what's interesting is that the entire world votes. All 13 Arab nations abstain, or they vote against.
Oppose, yes.
And everybody else says, well, it's a majority rule, so
Too bad for you. It's in your backyard, but we're deciding.
Yeah, you can see that just the nature of the origin of that decision is a problem, right? Like
yes.
that.
I mean, where else could the Jews have gone to enjoy a peaceful existence?
Well, particularly under any type of a vote that just says, we're going to put these people in your neighborhood.
We're taking your land. That's your most precious land, which, you know, land is a huge deal.
Yeah.
That very land. It feels offensive.
Well, particularly when.
And giving it to your worst enemies.
Yeah, well, definitely historical issues, right?
I'm using that as from a perspective of someone who believes that. Like,
yeah,
I prefer to see people as valuable people that we can figure things out with, but it can be really hard.
Yeah, well, and the point of I guess what I'm identifying here is if the origin of a conflict also matters, right? Because you can't fix the origin necessarily, particularly when like the rest of the world is just like, why are these guys still fighting? We made that decision. And you're like,
well, and you're talking about court, how people are, well, the court can't always fix all of the problems that cause the conflict. Right. If somebody's permanently affected by it, the court can't just wave a wand.
Exactly. Well, which is the reason why this conflict perpetuates itself, is that now, the neighborhoods get bigger and stronger and more powerful, and they're like, or discover oil in their backyards, or
Hatfields and the McCoys just like have more kids so they can all kill each other. It's very hard.
And at some point, like, and I even from a non-religious perspective, at some point there will be a resolution. Like I believe that there will be a it's a matter of like the kids play together in the playground, and then all of a sudden the adults are like, oh, I have no idea when it will be, but
aliens from space, they have to unite together to fight.
Right, like it's just impossible that conflict perpetuates itself forever. Like I just don't see that it cannot be forever.
But it is discouraging. You can see after thousands of years, right?
Absolutely.
There are so many painful experiences. If you demand, I don't know, you have to release the poison in your heart, and it's hard sometimes. But
yeah, and I did a paper
you can be peaceful in your own life and affect the world peace, like the butterfly effect.
Yeah. Well, and I did a paper in like 2004 on Abu Mazen, who was one of the first Palestinian prime ministers after Arafat.
Okay.
And there are players, but the players who create peace often have a fairly, they have to appear to be somewhat harmless, but they also have to be tremendously strong. Like there's some element to them that allows them to be in a role that they could play a peacemaker, but they also have to have some form of strength. For example, there's a book called Winston Churchill and Gandhi, I think it's, or Churchill and Gandhi. And Churchill's this dominant, personality in England and whatever. And ultimately, Gandhi's just willpower to just stay and persevere and not go away is enough, right? Like, and it doesn't mean that, Gandhi isn't as powerful as Churchill. He's not as, like, by way of resources, by way of heritage, by way of social dominance, by way of empirical dominance, colonial dominance, all stuff. And yet the person that Gandhi was, just being able to stay and be the rock that's uncomfortable over and over and over again, creates the change. So I anticipate that that's what I'm saying. There will be somebody that will come up in this Israeli-Palestinian conflict eventually, even maybe on both sides, that it will make sense. Like people will go, this cannot perpetuate itself.
It is very sad to see the harm that's being done on both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. I
It's
mean, like
very
who, like nobody likes seeing like babies in hospitals killed or children
or young people fighting,
yeah,
like children fighting,
yeah. It is super sad. So let's change direction a little
hostages. Yeah.
bit.
Well, I
Let's,
just want to put in this, document that I care about the people.
oh, absolutely. No,
You
no,
got the fight and the contention and the conflict, but it has real human harm. And that's a reason to resolve it and do the peace. They have some big groups of women in places that are just like, we're done with the fighting and the killing, and the women can have a lot of influence in those situations where they're just like, enough, like we want our sons back, we want our husbands back.
I totally agree. Well, and I think that I guess because I talked a little bit about the Palestinian side, even if we look at it from the Jewish side, it's astonishing how historical has been the pogroms and the different things against Israel. Like it wasn't just the Holocaust, like as a one-time event. Like Russia killed millions of Jews. Like lots of places have killed millions of Jews.
Well, they needed a place of refuge because
Yeah,
they didn't feel safe anywhere.
right. Yeah. So there's always a place of like where it's just kind of interesting to get more context. And you're like, man, this is a problem. Because there's another book that's interesting on Hollywood, how this was the one safe place for Jews to kind of set up their own little place of safety.
Okay.
And so it talks about most of the major motion pictures were initially founded by Jewish individuals, Warner Brothers, Fox,
Oh.
Universal Pictures,
Hmm.
Paramount. Like they all had like a Jewish origin of some form, because it was a place that they could go and they could create their identities and just create stuff. And people were like, huh. Like they just didn't see that coming, right? Like it wasn't taken over by the Anglo population. It wasn't taken over by, minorities per se. It just all of a sudden becomes this innovative place that nobody saw being developed per se by Jewish people. And all of a
Sure.
sudden they're like, we can exist. But yet, I was astonished, like so many years ago when Mel Gibson, after doing The Passion of Christ, has a drunken rant in which he's just totally anti-Semitic, and you're like, man, like,
Are we
so
still doing this?
yeah, I know. It's just, and there's others who kind of come into that same category of,
Well, and you look at COVID anti-Asian sentiment, and you're just like, guys,
yeah,
guys, 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 these people that live in the neighborhoods, when you go to the Middle East, the people are lovely. They want the same things. They're educated. They're lovely. And it's sometimes even Russia, right? Like some of the leadership, they're making decisions that influence everybody, but the people are good people.
okay, so that you mentioned Russia. I think this is a very interesting thing that I was talking to a conservative the other day, and I don't necessarily consider I try to be a middle or centrist. So sometimes I'm conservative, sometimes I'm liberal on certain topics. But one of the interesting things is that this conservative guy says, the one thing you can say about Putin is that he's not a circus clown. Like when you look at the United States and we look at our politics, there's a lot of circus, there's a lot of inconsistencies. There's a lot of like both parties not holding their party accountable. Like the fact that we have the two people who are currently running for president, like it's a little bit of a joke that this is the best we can do in a population that should be, having this world leadership element. And like for both parties to say this is what we're going to try to like put across as like our winner, you're like, this is awesome. Like that, whether you're for or against Trump, to have like losing cases, having pending criminal cases, like we never in history have we had a
Can
person
we
running for.
find anyone better, please?
Yeah, we like never in our history has our candidate for president been a criminal or a potential criminal or a pending criminal who has like $1 million lawsuits against them,
I mean,
right?
it's like electing, oh man, now I can't even think of his name. The guy that he wasn't impeached, but he like stepped down. Tell me what his name is.
Oh, Nixon, yeah.
Nixon. It's like electing Nixon after he's.
Yeah, like or like it's electing Bill Clinton after
There
like
is lots of smoke, you guys. There's lots of smoke.
yeah, but then even if okay, so now on Biden's side, like you have to say like he is literally incompetent. Like I think even if you vote
Could Joe down the street do better? Maybe.
yeah, and the fact that even amongst the Democrats, they're like, we're willing to risk this guy against Trump because I think Trump will beat him. Like,
Well, it just kind of
like
also shows that it's not about the exact president anyway. It's all the machinations, it's all the administration.
yeah,
You can't have that incompetent of a person at the top unless the real decisions are made by all these other people and he's just a puppet.
yeah. Well, I mean, there's some truth to that also, but I guess what in contrast though, when we were talking about Putin as an example, it's a dictatorship, and we're not saying it's not an authoritarian
He's a
problem.
KGB guy.
But the point is, there isn't anybody in the world questioning who is in charge of Russia.
Well, he's killing off his opponents.
But nobody's challenging that either, right? Like you can't say he's like who you want, but you also can't say like you wonder where he's at. Like you can't say I wonder how he's doing. Like exactly how he's doing. But even on the contrast, like the Ukrainian guy, you also know how he's doing, right? Like he has less resources, but
Zelensky.
he's doing a great job just trying to be a common man leader, right?
And
Like both.
then it just uh convicts all of the people in the US who are accepting the system, right? Not that I think we should, we got to do that. We got to do that conversation about your chaos, that your what's that called? You know what I'm saying, the where you don't have laws. What's that?
Oh yeah, anarchy.
Your anarchy stuff. When am I going
Anarchist.
to talk about anarchy? I don't know which discussion that goes in.
Well, I think one of the main questions is like so if we go to John Galt, right? Like the book Atlas Shrugged, and we go to John Galt. This is, Ayn Rand. Um, if you look at the pure system, she's saying, because she's more from the libertarian side, where she doesn't exactly abolish government, but she, in essence, says that a pure capitalist economy is the closest thing to autonomous, right? Because honorable capitalists will deal with each other honorably, and they're not going to take advantage of them because of the honor of capitalism, and their honor is in essence going to keep it pure. But Atlas Shrugged is all about dishonorable capitalists. Except for John Galt and the like small tiny community that he creates in Colorado.
Well, are we talking about the utopia that is, you could call it Zion or whatever? Like, some of us do believe that there are scenarios where people can deal honorably with each other, but we don't appear to be there right now.
Yeah, and I think that's the unfortunate dilemma of pure anarchists or pure her anarchist capitalist concept is the idea that people can be left in their honor to deal with each other openly. However, it was just identified this guy made a commentary. He says, what's the difference between covenants and covenants and contracts? So
Okay.
a covenant is identified often with God or with, somebody, but they're often voluntarily kept because of the value of the thing, right? Like with God, we keep our covenants with God because we want to be on good terms with God, so we enjoy the blessings of heaven and God or whatever, right? Even in an HOA, there's restrictive covenants because most of the time they want to enjoy the the good thing that will come if people voluntarily keep that covenant, because then the neighborhood enjoys their all white fences or their bungalows, or the pool is kept a certain way.
We could
But
probably spend a whole discussion just talking about HOAs.
yeah, so then the difference of a contract is often two people who don't trust each other, who are anticipating a potential negative thing, so they have to put it in writing,
Which
right?
is why people object so much to the prenuptial agreements, right?
Yeah, because it's kind of like we're anticipating disaster, right? Or our word isn't our bond. Like we're not keeping this on a like with the understanding that it's going to be fine. But there's also some truth because like a lot of the people I engage with the most openly, we never put it in writing because we just know it doesn't matter, right? Like we wouldn't even think to challenge our friendship by putting it in writing. Like we wouldn't say, I'm
I
not going
mean,
to
but
perform.
how could that challenge your friendship? If it was that secure, you could put something in writing that would be reasonable and respectful, whatever, and get it in writing. You wouldn't be worried about it.
No, but because you're friends, you just don't. Like you start doing the thing. And then
But sometimes people look back and realize they don't know the people as well as they thought.
no, no, no. Like that's what small claims is about. That's what all these friendships that go bust are about, is that they anticipated they didn't need to have it in writing, and then it eventually does go bust because they didn't know the person the well as they thought or whatever.
It happens in families too.
Absolutely, yeah. Like because if you don't spend the time to actually perform the agreement in a way that everybody's like, oh yeah, that's what I was expecting.
Well, and if
Also,
you all have different expectations and you assume the expectations of the other person are similar and they're totally not, I mean, it's not in bad faith necessarily if you have different expectations. That's why it's good to date someone for a long time before you get
exactly.
married. You've got to
Yeah.
figure out what the other perspectives are.
Well, and I like for example, I've been with my business partner since like 2015. But I knew him in St. George before. We don't have
Hmm.
anything in writing,
Really?
but
And
but
you're
we
an attorney. What?
but I also understood it wasn't as important as not having it in writing. Our performance became our contract, and I also understood, and I understand, like if it goes south, because I am the lawyer, I'm going to own my choices, right? I have to be accountable to myself for anything that potentially happens, right? There's the nature of the transaction. Even though I'm in partnership with my friend, I think if we are truly friends, I have to understand the role I play in our partnership.
I don't think that precludes having a written document.
Sure, it doesn't preclude
However,
it,
sometimes fighting over the document is worse than just letting it go.
and just getting on with the business sometimes. Because even he and I have had we've had rough spots where we
You
kind of
can
have to
nitpick
say,
it.
yeah, well,
Yeah.
we've had rough spots where we had to kind of say like, what is our plan? Like, what are we doing? Like, what's the fallout if this doesn't go? Like, how are we doing this? And it doesn't mean you still don't have like collaborative processes in which you come up with a solution, but sometimes there is a reality to um, sometimes the initial contract creates the problem because of the distrust that is also in the document. Like
My
I
feelings have adjusted somewhat over time about the advisability of having contracts that are made when you're in a good place with each other.
yeah, well, I think that there's, I'm not saying it's not good, but I'm saying that like when I do with people and I've written contracts for two people who didn't really know each other or they're just starting out, and I start asking uncomfortable questions like, what happens if it goes bad?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Sometimes that has ruined contracts and ruined businesses because the parties have not already asked those questions about their friendship or about their business. And they're like, wow, well, what are we going to do about
Well,
that?
it's
And
almost a good, I mean, maybe the contract doesn't go through, but maybe that's better.
yeah, sometimes it is better because I guess what we're identifying is kind of some semantics of if people have already processed themselves to the extent, like through dating a long time or knowing each other a long time or performing a long time, maybe you don't need as much in writing. But if
Mm.
you haven't done the work, it is definitely a problem and will create conflict if you have not proofed the situation. Like even if we talk about, creating the nation of Israel because the urgency of the world like position at that time still doesn't mean that wasn't a bad contract, right?
I mean, it's kind of like the whole preaching to the choir stuff. Like the people that don't need the contracts maybe do the contracts because they've figured it out. And the people sometimes that don't have contracts really maybe should have thought about some of those questions.
I totally agree. I think this has been a fun hour. Like we've explored a lot of good things again. And tomorrow we're going to do Fill Your Lamps, which is a session in regards to just different self-care and personal responsibility by way of like maybe self-reliance or just seeing where you're at in the world and making sure you understand like just are you in a position that you're good. So that's always a good discussion. You can find these, and hopefully you found this one on YouTube, and we have others on YouTube that are really great. And these are always live. So even though the two of us enjoy these conversations, anyone's welcome to join us in a live setting if you just want to talk or share ideas or even bring a topic and we'll just interview you. But it's been a great day. We hope that you'll find us at Steward Growth and on YouTube or stewardgrowth.com is our website. We'll see you.